So good evening, everyone. Welcome to this talk about Creswell Crags, which I've really been looking forward to. I did visit sort of 20 years or so ago, so it's an amazing place to go and visit, so you must go and see. But you're going to be talking about 150 years of research, which sounds really intriguing. So over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me for our exchange of talks that we did. So 150 years of research at Creswell Crags. So just to introduce Creswell Crags, there we are. So Creswell Crags is a limestone gorge on the Nottinghamshire Derbyshire border. It's got more than 20 caves and rock shelters. So you can see on the left-hand side here, we've got sort of a bird's eye-ish view. So we've got the visitor centre towards the bottom. We've got a nice stream running through a woodland, a meadow on the left-hand side, and then we've got the big lake, artificial lake because it's got a Victorian dam there, and that's our gorge. And the middle one shows some of the key named caves and rock shelters. So I'll be talking about all of those and then one or two others as well. And then the image on the right-hand side is our view from on top of the dam, and I call it our wow view. So I love it when we bring people up through the meadow, we stop them at Dam Head and they look down the gorge, and I love it when they just say wow. So the caves have been they've received research interest really since 1875. So this year was the 150th anniversary of the first official excavations at Creswell Crags. They've yielded lots of archaeological and paleontological evidence, and most of this is from a period called the late Pleistocene. So that began 125,000 years ago, ended at 11,700 years ago. It was a period of climatic changes, beginning with a warm interglacial and then fluctuating changes in climate through really cold glacial periods to sort of milder, cool periods, and then really cold again, etc. Until 11,700 years ago when the Holocene began, which is the warm period we're in today. So this talk will kind of follow a chronological approach. So we'll be splitting the research into time periods. And as we move through the talk, we'll see that excavation and other research techniques have been developed and interpretations of the findings have been reassessed and refined as well. But we're going to begin in the 1870s. So the first excavations at Creswell Crags were carried out in 1875, and the 19th century, just to put it into context, was a period of great interest in research into British cave deposits, with many other caves having already been excavated in Britain, some of which were excavated much earlier in the 19th century. So, for example, Kirkdale Cave in Yorkshire was excavated in 1821. And Kent's Cavern in Devon has undergone numerous excavations, the first of which began in 1824. So Creswell Crags is quite relatively late to the story of cave excavations. The material excavated from caves around Britain was an important component in developing understanding during the 19th century of past climatic changes and the subsequent impact on the environment, including animals and also prehistoric human presence in Britain. So in 1875, the people leading the excavations at Creswell Crags were Reverend John Megans Mello and Thomas Heath, who was the curator at Derby Museum. They were assisted by others, including a Mr. F. Tebbit, who worked at Creswell Quarries. So in April of 1875, they conducted a small exploration of Churchhole, where they found a woolly rhinoceros leg bone. And then they moved on to Pinhole. So we've got a drawing of Pinhole here, but from one of Mello's first reports on his excavations. At Pinhole, they discovered remains of many species, which were described by Professor George Busk, who was a surgeon, but who also worked in paleontology and anthropology. And he stated that woolly rhinoceros was again found, in addition to other species like hyenas, wolves, red foxes, Arctic foxes, wolverines, giant deers, reindeers, and woolly mammoths. In Mello's report in 1875, he noted that many of the bones in Pinhole had been gnawed by hyenas, and he stated that the cave had likely been used as a hyena den. And of the smaller species found in the cave, there was only mention of water vole and fish, and some modern sheep remains were found, so more Holocene species. A small excavation was also made into Robin Hood Cave, again yielding woolly rhinoceros and hyena remains. Flint tools were found in that cave, and Mello posited that the flint would have been transported to the gorge, as no flint is found in the geology of the area, so humans would have brought the flint to the gorge. Tools were made from quartzite as well, found in Robin Hood Cave. In the summer of 1875, Mello and Heath were joined by Professor William Boyd Dawkins from Manchester Museum. He already had experience leading excavations elsewhere, such as in Wookey Hole in Somerset, and also a couple of other places, but his excavation and recording methods were not always held in high regard. And we'll see in a bit later how that comes to pass in relation to Creswell Crags. In the summer of 1875, Robin Hood Cave was excavated and 3 sediment units were described. So they found lower red sand and clay, middle cave earth, and upper breccia. In the red sand and middle cave earth, they found lots of species, including again hyena, bear, reindeer, bison, horse, woolly rhino, and woolly mammoth. In Mello's report to the Geological Society in 1876, he noted that many of the bones had been gnawed by hyenas again, leading him to suggest that most of the bones had been brought into the cave by the hyenas. Dawkins noticed similarities between the deposits of Robin Hood Cave and those of Kent's Cavern, Wookey Hole, and Kirkdale Cave, all of which once acted as hyena dens. And he went into more detail describing how the bones had been modified by hyenas. So he stated that one or both of the epiphyses, so the ends of the long bones, of bones like humerus, ulna, radius, femur, and tibia, had been gnawed away, leaving only the shaft, so the sort of the main body of the bones. And similarly, the rear areas of sort of the mandible, the lower jawbone, had been removed. And Dawkins noted a difference between the red cave earth and the overlying breccia in Robin Hood Cave. The breccia did not contain hyena or wolf remains, but it did contain a single wild boar, which had not been found lower down. And the breccia also contained a greater number of hair remains than the red cave earth. And many of the hair bones had been split and broken. And Dawkins interpreted that Paleolithic people, so Stone Age, old Stone Age people, had subsisted on hairs. In the cave, flint and quartzite tools were found, in addition to one made out of clay. Ironstone. Most of the quartzite tools were found in the cave earth, and Dawkins described one quartzite and one clay ironstone as being sort of oval in shape and chipped all around. And you can kind of see examples here. He highlighted the similarities between the tools from the cave earth and those from Le Moustier in France, and also Kent's Cavern again. He also noted that more than 267 flint tools had been found, in addition to sort of the remains of flint, or like flint napping remains as well. Most of those derived from the breccia. He noted again similarities with flint tools at other sites such as Salutre in France, and again Kent's Cavern and Wookey Hole, and he describes some as lanceolate flakes, scrapers, borers, and piercers, and you can see some examples here. So you've got a borer on the right hand side there. And he suggested that some of the tools had once been inserted into wooden handles as well. He determined that the tools were Paleolithic, so again, Old Stone Age. He also recognised that the quartzite tools from the cave earth were older than the flint tools from the overlying breccia. And after the reading of Dawkins's report in 1876 to the Geological Society, Professor Joseph Prestwich stated that the relationship between the two sediment units containing the two types of tools was marked better in Robin Hood Cave than in any other cave in Britain. So really highlighting early on just how important Creswell Crags was seen to understanding the Pleistocene and the Paleolithic. In June of 1876, Robin Hood Cave was excavated further, and Church Hole was also excavated. And these were reported by Mello and Dawkins in 1877 to the Geological Society. In Robin Hood Cave, they excavated many different chambers. Robin Hood Cave is our biggest cave. It's quite complex. and there are revealed similar mammal species to those already discovered. Dawkins discussed hyenas further in this paper, and he stated that 865 teeth and jaws of hyenas had been uncovered from Robin Hood Cave, and he noted that bones of hyenas had been gnawed by the hyenas themselves. And he also measured the hyenas, and he compared the measurements of the hyenas from Creswell Crags with those from modern spotted hyena specimens that were held in the Royal College of Surgeons. And he observed that while the largest specimens were from Creswell Crags, there was an overlap in size between the smaller Pleistocene specimens and the largest modern day specimens. Quartzite and flint tools were found again, in addition to a bone awl. And it was during this season's digging at Robin Hood Cave that two finds were discovered. So there was a Homotherium, or scimitar-toothed cat tooth, which is the one on the right-hand side. So a canine tooth there, and you can see sort of the jagged edges all the way around. And there was an engraved bone found as well. So this is what we call our ochre horse. So it's a rib bone with a horse engraved onto it. And these finds sparked much fighting and controversy. So there was discrepancy in the excavation records of Heath's excavation records compared to Dawkins's records, although Dawkins's records were very, very sparse. Heath thought that where these items had been found in Robin Hood Cave, it looked like the sediment section had actually previously been worked. There were sort of arguments in Manchester newspapers, in societies, geological societies. There were thoughts of maybe they would have been planted, found elsewhere, maybe in Europe and planted. And it wasn't so much Heath that made the most disparaging comments. It was a guy called Plant, who seemed to have a bit of a vendetta against Dawkins, although Dawkins did seem to incite lots of enemies against him. And it was Plant who sort of stirred the pot a bit. Moving on from that, though, previous reports mentioned younger evidence in passing, but Dawkins's 1877 report sort of brought together the younger evidence, so the sort of the Holocene evidence found in Robin Hood Cave. He said there was potential Neolithic pottery, a Romano-British brooch and pottery, the hilt of a sword or dagger created from a femur bone, lead bullets and a metal ring, and domestic and wild animal remains from the Holocene, including badger, roe deer, dog, shorthorn cattle, sheep or goat, and pig. And at the end of Dawkins' summation of Robin Hood Cave, he listed 6 mollusk species that were identified by Thomas Kessel of Manchester Museum, although he did not interpret these at all. In terms of church hole, the mammals again were similar to those found in Pinhole and Robin Hood Cave, and included woolly rhino, mammoth, including deciduous teeth, so baby teeth of mammoth, horse, reindeer, giant deer, bison, brown bear, and hyena. And this is a jaw of hyena, so the upper jaw, and you've got a deciduous tooth, a baby tooth there on the left, and then the tooth on the right is the upper fourth premolar, and that is just erupting. So it hasn't fully erupted through the jaw yet. As well as flint and quartzite and church hole, bone tools were found, including a needle and 2 awls made from hair bones, and you can see those pictured there. Mother of Grundy's parlour was explored by Dawkins and Mello, but nothing they found encouraged them to dig further. And in addition, they found that it actually undergone sort of unofficial excavations. This was by a Creswell resident whose wife had apparently dreamt of treasure in Mother Grundy's parlour, so he went to have a dig around to see if he could find anything. At the end of his report in 1877, Mello described quite vividly what the work at Creswell Crags had helped to illuminate about the Pleistocene. So I'm just going to quote him here because it's quite a nice passage. So he said, "It will be seen that the exploration of the 3 principal caves of Creswell Crags has made it manifest that during the Pleistocene period of Derbyshire and the adjoining counties were inhabited by a very numerous and diversified fauna. That in the vast forests and pastures, which we may picture to ourselves as extending in one unbroken line far to the east and south of the present shores of England, the mammoth and the woolly rhinoceros, the hippopotamus, which has been found in Yorkshire, the great Irish elk, the reindeer, the bison, and the horse found a congenial home. That here also the savage hyena, the crafty glutton, the bear, the lion, the wolf, and the fox, together with the great saber-toothed feline, sought their prey, and that, with these and others not named, man lived and hunted and waged a more or less precarious struggle for existence, finding a shelter amidst the vicissitudes of a varying climate in the numerous caves of the district, already the haunts of the hyena and its companions. So quite a beautiful sort of passage he wrote there, quite vivid. But through this talk, we'll see how this interpretation has changed through the years as research has progressed. And indeed, as Mellows and Dawkins' own research has progressed. And although Creswell Crags held some important discoveries, so much understanding of the Pleistocene derives from many other sites in Britain and around the world, and no single site can hold all of the answers about the Pleistocene. They're all part of like a massive, complex, and ever-shifting jigsaw puzzle. So Mellow and Dawkins, despite stating that they'd been finished at Creswell Crags, weren't actually finished. So they gave a further report in 1879 to the Geological Society, and they stated that they were inspired to return to Creswell Crags after a Mr. John Young told them that he had purchased a hippopotamus tooth in London, which had been found in Mother Grundy's parlour by Misters Duffy and Gain of Tuxford in Nottinghamshire. And while hippo had been mentioned in Mellow's passage as having been found in Yorkshire, it hadn't previously been found at Creswell Crags. So they returned to Mother Grundy's parlour, they dug down, they found red sandy cave earth, and within that they found the remains of hyena, wolf, fox, bear, bison and reindeer. They also found lots of hyena coprolite, so fossilised poo, that hadn't previously been found in other caves. They found quartzite tools and a tool of clay ironstone. But underneath this red sandy cave earth, they found red clay and ferruginous sand. In that, they found more hippopotamus and they found narrow-nosed rhinoceros, which was another species that had not previously been found at the site. They also found bison, hyena, fox, and bear. And Dawkins and Mellow suggested that one of the hippo skulls had been brought into the cave by hyenas. They remarked on the absence of tools, horse, mammoth, and woolly rhino from the red clay, so the layer that hippo had been found in. Dawkins and Mellow correlated the red sandy cave earth with the red sand in the other caves in Creswell Crags, and they determined that the underlying red clay, the one of the hippos, was older. On the 27th of January 1880, Mellow presented a paper to the Manchester Geological Society about Creswell Crags, and after summarising the finds from Mother Grundy's parlour, he stated that the Pleistocene history of this district now appears tolerably complete. Given that research is still continuing at Creswell Crags, Mellow's statement seems to have been quite premature and quite ambitious. Following Mellow's paper, Dawkins addressed the Geological Society and he stressed the importance of having found the two deposits in Mother Grundy's parlour, which was, according to him, the first cave in Britain and France in which the two deposits were located together. And I'll quote him here. So he said, "We did not know until we had this series of remains in Mother Grundy's parlour that the hippopotamus and the leptorhine rhinoceros, or the narrow-nosed rhinoceros, the hyena and the like, really were in this part of the world before the reindeer and the other creatures were here. Of course, it has been guessed before, but this is the first bit of direct evidence we have in this country." So just 2 years after Mellow made his description of Pleistocene Britain, the picture has changed. But again, it really highlights the importance of Creswell Crags at that time. So overall, while the first excavations established Creswell Crags as an important site for understanding the Pleistocene mammals and Paleolithic humans, some of the methods undertaken by the excavators were less than desirable. They dug out huge volumes of sediment in short periods of time, and while they recorded different types of sediment and broadly where the bones, the teeth, and the stone tools were found, that wasn't really sufficient detail for later researchers to understand the exact locations of each find, nor the relationship to other finds. That kind of limits what can be interpreted from the remains. And further, the researchers really only focused on large mammals and evidence of humans, and they disregarded most small vertebrate remains, and they didn't even collect all of the remains of larger mammals, instead discarding them in spoil heaps outside the caves, which we'll see later in this talk. The later 19th century saw additional excavations. So the first of these was by Dr. Robert Leng in Robin Hood Cave and Dog Hole. He wrote a short report in 1890, includes only one line of his entire excavation of Dog Hole, stating that many of the same species were found as had been found in earlier excavations elsewhere in Creswell Crags, with the addition of the wild boar, although, as I mentioned, wild boar had been found by Dawkins, Mello and Heath. In Robin Hood Cave, he found hippopotamus, which had not been found previously in that cave. But most of Leng's paper was dedicated to the discovery of a felid from Robin Hood Cave that he stated was Pliocene of age. This is unlikely given that the Pliocene is far earlier than the late Pleistocene, which is the age of most of the deposits at Creswell Crags. Further, the measurements that Lang published about the felid bones correspond to those of the lynx, and it's much more likely that his felid that he found was actually lynx rather than a Pliocene felid, because lynx has been found in late Pleistocene deposits in Britain. Unfortunately, the bones that Lang found have since been lost, so we can't really verify that for certain. A few years later, a couple of other people excavated. The first guy had a really cool name, Dr. Winfrid Lawrence Henry Duckworth, and then there was F.E. Swainson. So Dr. Duckworth was an anatomist and an anthropologist at the University of Cambridge. He wrote a book published in 1912 called Prehistoric Man, although it doesn't actually mention Creswell Crags. I have been unable to find anything about F.E. Swainson, not even his first names. The two excavated what they called an ossiferous fissure, which was essentially a fissure containing bones. Their report to the Geological Society in 1895 was very brief. Essentially, it was just these two paragraphs that I've included on the screen here. They found woolly rhino, reindeer, spotted hyena, and steppe bison. Okay. After an interlude, the next phase of research at Creswell Crags began in the 1920s and 30s. And this was led by Albert Leslie Armstrong, who was a trained quantity surveyor. He excavated Mother Grundy's Parlour, Pinhole, Boathouse Cave, and Yew Tree Shelter. The excavations in Mother Grundy's Parlour were conducted from April to October 1924, and he worked alongside someone called G.A. Garfitt. He dug through the spoil discarded by Dawkins and Mello, and he found bison and hyena, so it's really a testament to the less than careful methods of the Victorian excavators. In the Yellow Cave Earth in Mother Grundy's Parlour, he found quartzite tools alongside the remains of lion, hyena, reindeer, woolly rhino, mammoth, horse, and bison. And he identified the quartzite tools as Mousterian, a type of tool, Mousterian technology. In the Red Sandy Cave Earth, which was on top of the Yellow Cave Earth, he found flint and bone and antler tools. The bone and antler tools were interpreted as awls and points, and he also found split bones, which had been heated or burnt. A half was found that had been dug into the surface of the Yellow Cave Earth. The cave earth had been heated and charcoal was present. And amongst this was split and charred bones, flint flakes, and tools that had been heated. Armstrong said there was a limestone slab that could have been used as a seat nearby. And the abundance of flint flakes in the area led him to suggest that people had created their tools actually in that location. He also reported 3 engraved bones in close proximity to the hearth. The engravings he interpreted as depicting a reindeer, a bison, and a rhino. However, these were not widely accepted at the time, and the engravings may actually have been a result of natural damage, such as root etching, so damage by the roots of plants. Armstrong reported 1,557 flints from Mother Grundy's Parlour, many of which he identified as Upper Paleolithic, so having been made by Homo sapiens. Specifically the Aurignacian, and the flints included blades, burins, shouldered points, and scrapers. In September 1924, Armstrong began to examine Pinhole, finding material that had not been excavated by the Victorians. These excavations were detailed in annual interim reports by a committee to the British Association for the Advancement of Science. To my knowledge, Armstrong never compiled a single final report on his excavations on Pinhole. So the committee that he was part of has a less than succinct name. So it was called the Committee Appointed to Cooperate with a Committee of the Royal Anthropological Institute in the Exploration of Caves in the Derbyshire district. So quite a mouthful. This committee included Armstrong alongside Mr. Burkitt, Professor Dorothy Garrod, Mr. John Wilfred Jackson, Professor Palmer, and Mr. Peake. And there were others who were sort of not as consistently present. And I'm going to mention Dorothy Garrod and John Wilfred Jackson again very soon. So in improvements to the Victorian excavation techniques, Armstrong excavated in spits downwards and also, although his methods could have been improved further. Many of his finds were marked in pencil, so you can kind of just see that on this reindeer jaw here. And then the pencil markings have been replicated in pen. And the markings indicate the distance into the caves from a datum at the entrance and the depth from the former cave floor. He also sieved the sediment to find small objects, although he did sieve inside of the cave on top of in situ sediment, and his sieve was a little bit too big, so he wasn't perfect. In Pinhole, he identified lower and upper cave earths. In the lower cave earth, there was Mousterian quartzite tools, so Neanderthal tools. The upper cave earth contained Magdalenian flint tools. The upper cave earth also contained engraved lance points made out of mammoth ivory. So, as mentioned, Armstrong worked alongside Professor Dorothy Garrod, who was from the University of Cambridge. So, she was an expert in the stone tools of the Paleolithic. And she wrote a book called The Upper Paleolithic of Britain, published in 1926. And within that book, she coined the term Creswellian. So it's just that area that I've highlighted there, although it is kind of a footnote at the very end of her conclusion. So the term Creswellian she used to define a tool technology, given the abundance of these types of tools found at Creswell Crags. Although today the Creswellian is more commonly referred to as the Magdalenian. So I mentioned he sieved, so he found a lot more small mammals. And in a 1934 report, Dr. John Wilfred Jackson sort of summarised the rodents found in Pinhole. So Dr. Jackson worked at Manchester Museum and was supervised for a time by William Boyd Dawkins. So he mentioned many rodent species, more than just the water vole mentioned in Mello and Heath's reports. So Jackson's report included Norway lemming, collared lemming, water vole, common vole, bank vole, wood mouse, and hazel dormouse. The larger mammals from Pinhole were identified as many found before: hyena, wolf, lion, bear, reindeer, giant deer, woolly rhino, mammoth, and horse. Armstrong excavated Boathouse Cave, although this was much less successful. So after digging through 6 feet of stiff red clay, he hit concrete. He described the whole process as arduous and baffling. He blasted the concrete away to reveal some cave earth, and he found a reindeer bone. So not quite as successful. He excavated Yew Tree Shelter, which revealed similarities to Mother Grundy's parlour, including a Mousterian quartzite tool. He identified mammoth, reindeer, horse, bison, woolly rhino, wolf, and hyena. And alongside the excavations, Armstrong and the rest of the committee made other important contributions to Creswell Crags, so they succeeded in having Mother Grundy's parlour and Pinhole scheduled as ancient monuments, therefore providing them with a level of protection, which was and still is important given the significance of the material found there. So today, Creswell Crags is a scheduled monument and a triple SI. The 50s and 60s saw excavations in 1959 and 1960 by Professor Charles Brian Montague McBurney of the University of Cambridge. He undertook a small excavation in Mother Grundy's parlour and found some stone tools, which are Upper Paleolithic, some of them. He also collected specimens for carbon dating, which were conducted by H. Godwin and E. H. Willis and published in 1962. As far as I'm aware, these are the very first radiocarbon dates carried out on material from Creswell Crags, and indeed the very first quantitative dates on Creswell Crags material. And given that radiocarbon dating was only developed in the 1940s, the method was still very much in its infancy when it was applied to this material in 1962. The dated material was charcoal. It yielded uncalibrated radiocarbon dates. So after you have a radiocarbon date, you've got to sort of calibrate it to turn it into a calendar age. They ranged from around about 8,800 to 6,705 years ago. However, these were unexpectedly young, according to McBurney, as they fell within the Holocene and Mesolithic periods rather than the Pleistocene and the Upper Paleolithic, which was what he found. Dr. John Campbell visited Creswell Crags in July of 1969 as part of his PhD research on the Upper Paleolithic of Britain. He also visited a number of other sites around Britain. At Creswell Crags, he excavated holly shelter, which was sterile, so it had no organic remains, so no bones or anything found there. He excavated around the entrance areas of Mother Grundy's Parlour and Robin Hood Cave, and his method used a grid system of metre squares, and then he also excavated in layers. And he also took note of changes in sediment and stratigraphy through his sections. In Mother Grundy's Parlour, he found Mesolithic and Neolithic tools. In contrast to Armstrong's excavations, but similar to McBurney's finds, Campbell found relatively few Upper Paleolithic tools, although he was excavating slightly to the east of where Armstrong was excavating. In Mother Grundy's Parlour, he found similar species again, so bears, horse, wild boar, giant deer, potentially red deer, aurochs or bison, common shrew, and narrow-skulled vole. In Robin Hood Cave, he found Upper Paleolithic or later Upper Paleolithic stone tools, including Creswell points. So we've just got two images here of late Upper Paleolithic tools in our collections. He also found some potentially Mesolithic lithics. The concentration of the lithics was in his square called A1, just inside the western entrance to Robin Hood Cave, and Campbell suggested that most of the intense flint knapping activity occurred in that area. Campbell also found a hearth with burnt sand, charcoal and burnt bone. He found some boulders, which he suggested may have been brought into the cave from outside, as they were more weathered than those elsewhere inside the cave. He identified mammals from Robin Hood Cave, including mammoths, horse, reindeers, etc., potentially red deer and potentially ibex, red fox and possibly Arctic fox. Small species included water vole, short-tailed field vole, narrow-skulled vole, Norring lemming, collared lemming, wood mouse and mountain hare. And of particular note is Campbell's find of a steppe pika. So according to him, that was the first known record of this species in this area of Britain. So I've just included a photo of a steppe pika there. So it's related to rabbits and hares, but it's got small ears and it's super cute. Campbell obtained more radiocarbon dates. So charcoal was dated to more than 40,000 years old. This was unexpectedly old because it was found in the later Upper Paleolithic layers. So Campbell suggested that it might have derived from the underlying Middle Paleolithic layer. He dated a brown bear humerus around about 28,500 years old. This was again unexpectedly old. So he suggested that it might have come from overlying spoil from a previous excavation. He dated two horse bones, a humerus and a metacarpal. And these were dated to around about 10,590 and 10,390 years old. He also sampled the sediment in both Mother Grundy's Parlour and Robin Hood Cave for pollen. So he stated that pollen analysis in largely inorganic sediments was not commonly conducted nor easily achieved. However, he did succeed in identifying a few species such as birch, juniper and willow. The next excavations were in the 70s and 80s. Dr. Rogan Jenkinson led a lot of the research in Creswell Crags and the surrounding Creswell Heritage area. The most extensive of which were in were in Pinhole. He excavated in 1 centimetre spit, so really, really like thin layers. All of the sediment was removed and sieved, and the small bones, teeth, shells, etc. picked out. Animals identified were largely small mammals, including bats, lemmings, voles and shrews. And in our collections, we've got more than 30,000 specimens just from Jenkinson's excavations of Pinhole alone. He also found a juvenile hyena skeleton, and that's the photograph on the left there. In 1978, there was a rock fall in the entrance to Dog Hole. This exposed previously unexcavated sediments in a crevice, which was named Dog Hole Fissure. The sediments were at risk of being eroded away, so Jenkinson led a rescue excavation. Despite the urgency of the work, the sediments were excavated as carefully as possible. This was a difficult feat, given that the presence of boulders and other rock debris. Jenkinson interpreted the vertebrates of being Holocene of age, and vertebrates included wolf, red fox, beaver, red deer, and frog. So we've got a wolf on the left-hand side there and a beaver on the right-hand side there. He also excavated and identified mollusks. And those species identified favoured caves, woodlands, open vegetation, and freshwater environments, giving us an insight into what the environment was like when the mollusks were alive. In the 1990s, there were no excavations that I'm aware of, but research was still carried out on previously excavated material. So there was a paper in 1994 published by Dr. Ruth Charles and Dr. Roger Jacobi. They assessed the material excavated by Campbell from Robin Hood Cave. They were unable to identify any remains of Arctic fox and giant deer from Campbell's material, and they stated that the ibex identified by Campbell may have been a sheep or goat instead. They did find some pig teeth which hadn't been previously identified. They looked at the preservation and they found that there were two preservation types in terms of the bone. So some of the bones were stained, worn, and fragmented, and the other bones were yellow, white, and sharply preserved. So the anatomical detail was sharply preserved. So the first group, so the older looking group, spotted hyena and woolly rhino bones belonged to that group. And then the second group was interpreted as being late glacial in age, so right at the end of the Pleistocene, and that included mountain hare, fox, horse, a reindeer, possibly some later species as well, like red deer, sheep, and goat. They really focused on the hair bones though in their report. So they examined the bones and they found that there were cut marks made by stone tools. So we've got a humerus of a hair bone there and a close up here. And you might be able to see these horizontal, sort of these straight lines kind of running parallel to each other. And they've been interpreted as cut marks. And the bones had also been broken as well. So this damage indicated skinning of the hairs, defleshing and dejointing the hairs, breaking the bones. The fur was likely used, the flesh was likely eaten, and the bones may have been broken to access the marrow. And as previously mentioned, hair bones have been found that were used to create tools. So really showing that the people in the Pleistocene were using the entirety of these hairs. The 21st century has so far included excavations, other research in the gorge, and research upon previously excavated material, including the use of new and improved techniques. Many of these studies incorporate material from Creswell Crags as part of research, which includes material from many sites, so really using a more holistic approach. So in 2003, three researchers, Dr. Paul Barn, Professor Paul Pettit, and Professor Sergio Ripoll, set out on a road trip to see if they could find Paleolithic art in Britain. The reason was that rock art had been found not so far away, really, in continental Europe, and other Paleolithic evidence had been found in British caves. So there was no reason, really, that rock art would not be present in Britain. So they started at Creswell Crags and they were successful almost immediately. So they found a triangle or V shape in Robin Hood Cave, a banana shape in Mother Grundy's parlour, but it was in Churchill that they were most successful. So the numbering of engravings found in Churchill kind of differs depending on which researcher you speak to, but the clearest have been interpreted as a red deer stag, a bison, an ibis, and something invariably referred to as birds or women. So we've got the bison on the left-hand side there. So I'll just highlight it with my mouse. So this is where my mouse is running now, is its front leg. We've got its bottom of its face. This sort of curved area is its eye, up its head. This sort of banana shape is its horn. Up its back, down its back, and then this sort of ovalish area, open oval, is it's sort of the top of its muscular front leg. And then on the right hand side, we've got the ibis. We've got the eye here, the beak, the neck, and then up its neck and the top of its head. And that's a technique called bas relief. So some of the features there were already existing in the rock and it's really just been enhanced. The dating of the rock art was determined by comparing the style to rock art on the continent and also through uranium series dating of flowstones. So similar material to stalactites and stalagmites, which was overlying the art. So the flowstone was dated to 12,800 to 7,320 years ago. So this tells us that the underlying rock art was older than this. Radiocarbon dating methods had really progressed. In the early 2000s, there was a technique called ultrafiltration pre-treatment that was developed, and this was slated to remove more modern contaminants than previous methods. And in light of this, a programme of radiocarbon data was undertaken on material from British sites, including redating previously dated material and dating previously undated material. And the results were published in two papers in 2006 by Roger Jacobi, Thomas Hyam, and others. And they dated lots of different species. So we've got an example here of a hyena tooth, a hyena molar that's been sampled for dating. There were further excavations from 2006 to 2012, led by Professor Paul Pettit. He focused on a spoil heap, so a Victorian spoil heap outside of Churchill. And in digging the spoil heap, he discovered likely in situ undisturbed material beneath this. And they also discovered a small cave or rock shelter called the crypt. And this was excavated in 10 centimetre horizontal spits. A huge amount of material wasn't recovered, and mostly small mammal remains which are still being researched. In their interim report in 2009, Pettit and others outlined some of what had been discovered up until that point. So there were Holocene mammals like badger, sheep, cows, and pigs, Holocene artifacts including a Neolithic aged bone pin, Bronze Age pottery, items from the Roman era, medieval or early post-medieval stone board called a Merrill's or Nyman's Boris board, and 17th century pottery. So really showing just how Creswell Crags has been used over time. And then lots of Pleistocene material, including lots of the animals previously found at Creswell Crags. There was a project called the Ancient Human Occupation of Britain Project. A book was published of the same name in 2011. In one chapter, Dr. Andrew Curran and Dr. Roger Jacobi reassessed the mammalian assemblages for the late Pleistocene in Britain. They designated mammal assemblage zones, which are sort of representative groups of mammals from particular sites. And for a period called Marine Oxygen Isotope Stage 3, a period roughly around about 57 to 29,000 years ago, they used the mammals excavated by Armstrong from Pinhole's Lower Cave Earth as their representative site. So the mammals included those seen here, reindeer, hyena, and horse, so from left to right, including also lots of other species as well, like mammoths and woolly rhino. Another paper looked by Roger Jacobi and Thomas Hyam, Dr. Thomas Hyam, looked at the evidence for the Upper Paleolithic in Britain. They radiocarbon dated mountain hare and wild horse bones from Creswell Crags, which bore evidence of human modification. And the dates of those spanned from 15,000 to 13,600 years ago, indicating that humans were present at Creswell Crags and subsisting on these species at that time. Pollen was extracted from coprolites hyena poo by Dr. Mark Lewis. One of the sites was from Pinhole. And the pollen extracted from the coprolite was 99% non-arboreal pollen, so mostly sort of non-trees. The few trees in the landscape included birch, willow, and hazel. And this matches well with what is known from much of Eurasia from the same time period. So the presence of what has been termed mammoth steppe, so open steppe grassland for which there is no modern analogue. And I'm just going really quick, so I know I've almost at 45 minutes. So back to Church Hall and the crypt. So as I mentioned, a lot of the material from the excavations is still being worked on. And I worked on this for my master's dissertation in 2013, and I'm still working on it today. And also, just last year and this year, two master's students from the University of Sheffield have recently based their dissertations on some of the material. It's a very slow process. So we have bags and bags of gravel. It involves picking out all the bones, the teeth, and the other material from the gravel, and then identifying them. So this diagram here is from my dissertation. So just to describe what you're seeing. So on the left-hand side, we've got depth from the surface. So 230 centimeters at the bottom, up to 70 centimeters at the top. And along the top is the Latin names of lots of different mammal species. So most of the mammals identified were small mammals, apart from a single reindeer, Ranchifetorandus mandible. And mammals include shrew species, lemmings, vole species, steppe pika, wood mouse, and single specimens of hazel dormouse and ground squirrel. A lot of the teeth bear evidence of digestion, so indicating that the mammals had been consumed by small mammalian carnivores or birds of prey, and then the bones and teeth were then deposited in the scats of the carnivores or regurgitated in the pellets of the birds of prey. So birds of prey may have roosted within or just outside of the crypt. And speaking of birds, Professor John Stewart and Dr. Roger Jacobi published a paper in 2015 looking at the bird remains excavated by Armstrong in Pinhole. And most of them were found alongside Middle Paleolithic, so Neanderthal tools. Bird species identified included wood pigeon and grey heron, which we both see in Creswell Crags today. Cold adapted species included the willow and the rock ptarmigan, and Atlantic puffin was quite a surprising species that were found. Long-legged buzzard, common kestrel, short-eared owl, and northern hawk owl were among the birds of prey that were found. And the researchers stated that Pinhole has yielded one of the largest fossil avifaunas in Europe, both in terms of the quantity of the remains and the claimed number of taxa represented. So again, highlighting the importance of Creswell Crags. Okay. Another technique, a relatively new technique, is called zooms or zoology by mass spectrometry, also known as collagen peptide mass fingerprinting. And the premise of zooms is that each genus or species of animals has a distinct fingerprint of collagen peptides. So the collagen is extracted from bones. And the peptides are then compared with that of known genus and species in order to find a match. This is especially useful when applied to bone that cannot be easily identified by eye, including bone fragments, bats, or small mammalian postcrania. So in 2017, Dr. Mike Buckley and others conducted zooms analysis on bone fragments from Pinhole, excavated by Jenkinson. The most abundantly identified fragments were Rangefur, so reindeer, followed by Coelodonta, so woolly rhinoceros. And overall, the list of the species matches well with those identified in the 1980s, although the proportions are different. So there's a greater number of the large herbivores found via the zooms method. But they stated that given that hyenas likely accumulated many of the herbivores, this is not surprising given their ability to break bones. So the hyenas probably fragmented lots of the bone. In 2018, Buckley and others conducted zooms on voles and lemming postcrania from Pinhole. Around half of the remains, so 2,227 remains, were of collared lemming, and then the next abundant were narrow-skulled vole and Norway lemming. And then in a final paper published in 2019, Dr. Mike Buckley and Professor Andrew Chamberlain conducted zooms on bat bones from Pinhole, and they found lesser horseshoe bats most abundant, followed by mouse-eared bats. Radiocarbon models have been created, including individuals from Creswell Crags, as well as radiocarbon dates of individuals elsewhere in Britain and Europe. And these are useful to see periods when species have been present in an area, periods of potential absence, and also the potential time of local or complete extinction of species. So Professor Adrian Lister and Professor Anthony Stewart have created lots of radiocarbon models on species like woolly mammoth, woolly rhino, giant deer, and cave lion. These diagrams are from my PhD thesis published in 2019. So I created models of hyenas, cave lions, woolly rhino, red deer, and reindeer. And this is just the spotted hyena one. So I've got the full diagram on the right hand side, and then I've just taken a snapshot of the northwestern European sort of part of the model there, which includes dates from Church Hall and Robin Hood Cave and Pinhole. And you can kind of see from the model that hyenas disappeared from the central region of Europe first, then the northwestern region of Europe, and then the more southern region of Europe later on in the Pleistocene. Which marks were found? So during a cave tour in Robin Hood Cave with my colleague John in 2018, visitors spotted what are called apotropaic marks, commonly called witch marks. And more commonly, they are found around the entrances to houses and churches, thought to keep evil outside. However, at Robin Hood Cave, they were found inside, so mostly near a deep hole, maybe to keep evil inside the cave. So this again, these are only like a few hundred years old. So again, showing just sort of how people have used Creswell Crags over thousands and thousands of years. Um, Bones of animals, including hyenas, have been used in other research. So, looking at the measurements of hyena skulls, mandibles, and teeth, which was what I did for my PhD, looking at whether there was any changes in size of proportions of the bones through time. But what you're seeing here is a graph of body mass reconstructions of hyenas. So I've just highlighted those from Church Hole, Pinhole, and Robin Hood Cave. The body masses of the hyenas range from 67 to 114 kilograms, pretty much spanning almost most of the size range represented in the graph. The penultimate bit I'm going to talk about is again rock art. So since in 2022, three researchers, Dr. Izzy Risher, Dr. Barbara Oostervik, and Dr. Lisa Ellen Meyering, spent lots of time in Church Hall, Mother Grundy's Parlour, and Robin Hood Cave. And they were studying the rock art. They used a number of techniques, many of which were not previously available to the original discoverers of the rock art in 2003. So they were really sort of verifying the rock art and seeing if they could find any more rock art. And then finally, excavations are continuing to the present day. So since 2019, excavations have been led by Dr. Kevin Kuykendall of the University of Sheffield. And he's focusing on a landscape approach. So he's trying to find deposits outside of the caves, although the tricky part is trying to find undisturbed in situ sediments. A number of techniques will be applied to the newly excavated material as well as existing collection specimens, and it's hoped that this will shed more light on human activities and environments in which they lived. So the image on the right-hand side is sort of a section that they've excavated showing some layers of sediment. And then on the left-hand side, there's one of the areas of excavations showing some of the people working on it. And we've had staff from the University of Sheffield, students from the University of Sheffield, and also we've had like a community project as well with local volunteers coming in to learn excavation and post-processing techniques. So finally, just the research continues. So there's many more things to tell. There's lots of research continuing at the moment. Lots of stuff I can't tell you because it's not been published, but really, really exciting stuff going on. So I will finish there. And sorry for running over. I did practice it yesterday and I was well within time. So maybe I spoke too quickly yesterday when I practiced it. So sorry for rushing the end bit.
Talk about the dizzying array of ongoing research. It's as bad as our collections. We've got a team from the University of Leicester in sort of in at the moment. They've been here for about a month now, looking at our collections, but absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
There's just one question in at the moment, but I want to get in first, if I may.
Mhm.
Which is you talked about there being tools made of flint and quartzite. Is it known where the sources of those materials was?
Yeah, so quartzite is probably quite local, so it's found in the region. The flint, so the only local source of flint is some glacial till, so glacial deposits. So it's thought that the flint came more from the south and the southeast, I believe.
You mean from Talk in sort of Cambridgeshire or the
Ah,
Wold, not the Wolds, or not
I'm
sure.
not off the top of my head. Can't remember off the top of my head.
Sorry to put you on the spot
That's
there.
okay.
Okay, so Elizabeth had said, what happened to the humans? Which is an interesting question. There's a second one just come in. Could the bone tools have been made by Neanderthals? So could you talk a bit about the sort of well the human evidence?
Yeah, so I think I kind of glossed over that probably a bit too much. So there's a lot to get through. So yeah, so we have evidence of Neanderthals, and the evidence of Neanderthals is via their stone tools. So the quartzite tools, the clay ironstone tools. And also we have evidence of them predating one species, reindeer. So there's one, possibly two cut marked reindeer bones. So not a lot of evidence of what Neanderthals were consuming, but a huge number of Neanderthal stone tools. In terms of the Homo sapiens, we have lots of flint tools and lots of bone tools by them as well. Also, some art made by them. So the sort of the ochre horse that I mentioned, whether or not that was a genuine find. Also, one of Armstrong's pieces of art that he found is a lot more accepted than those found in Mother Grundy's Parda. So it's called Pinhole Man. So it's sort of like a sort of a human-ish like figure. So that was created by Homo sapiens. And sort of the damaged wild horse and mountain hare bones were also predated by Homo sapiens as well.
It's quite interesting. So that means that the someone that has just said had the ice sheets retreated, which sort of provides that context. Then, if they were predating on reindeer,
Yeah, so none of the humans were present at Creswell Crags during the full glacial conditions because that was far too cold
a
for,
little difficult.
yes, yeah, just far too cold for a lot of species, including humans, to have been present. But the ice sheets, these are the last ice sheets, didn't reach Creswell Crags from the last glacial maximum. So the ones from 26,000 years ago onwards, they didn't reach as far as Creswell Crags, although they were close. Um, but yeah, so when humans were here, it was cool, but not very, very cold.
Sounds more tundra-like, sort of climate today of Norway or
Yeah,
Sweden, perhaps.
possibly. Yeah, I mean, the summers were cool. The winters were a lot chillier. I can't remember the temperature reconstructions off the top of my head. No temperature reconstructions from Creswell itself, but from other areas in Britain. Um, but yeah, so not pleasant to be out all of the time, but not super, super harsh.
So I imagine people were coming, sort of moving north and south, with sort of following the reindeer herd. So it presumably it was much like sort of Sweden or Finland, the Sami
Yeah,
people.
possibly. Yeah, yeah.
That's sort of the impression or the guess estimate I had.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm quite interested as well that the bone identifications in the early period, sort of in the 1870s and 80s, it sounds as though they were quite accurate. Is that
Yeah,
is that right?
yeah. I mean, a lot of the species that they identified are species that we still think were there today. There were a few. Um, I think they mentioned like grizzly bear, which would now just term brown bear. Um, and I'm just skipping back through just to see whether I can see any others. Yeah, I mean they weren't terrible. We've had some other as maybe even some of the later research where the identifications have been a bit more questionable. So, but yeah, Dawkins, despite his faults at his excavation techniques, was quite well regarded as a paleontologist. He was quite good at identifying his bones, I think.
So the issue was more what they missed
Yeah,
rather than misidentification.
yeah, like their slapdash methods and lack of recording.
Question for Colin. From the tools, can you deduce how long at any one period humans actually used the caves? Would it be hundreds of years, 10 years, tens of years? That's about
It,
sort of any one.
yeah,
Um,
it's really difficult to tell. Because I mean, you can't date the stone tools themselves. And even if you date the bones found alongside the stone tools, there's such uncertainty margins on radiocarbon dates that it's really difficult to sort of pinpoint them into specific years. So yeah, as far as I'm aware, you can't tell, unfortunately.
and I imagine most of the tools came up from very poorly recorded excavations, so it's not as though you have really good stratigraphy.
Yeah, I mean the later excavations were better, so at
Oh
least
yeah,
we have
yeah.
we have that. But yeah, from definitely not from the Victorians. It's very difficult to tell.
So I think with that, I think that was the last question. Unless there's anyone else, quickly speak now. Well,
Mhm.
type now or forever hold your tongue. In that case, so thank you so much, and it's been absolutely fascinating. And as I said right at the start, it's the site is absolutely amazing to go and visit. And you quite were right about that wow moment.
Mm.
And it's so interesting to see the lake there now, but you always wonder what there must have been quite a lot of water there. You talked about fish bones, which
Yes.
sorry, sorry, I'm actually going off into a question there, so it's just got me thinking. So there must have been quite a sizable river
Yeah,
even before the
possibly.
dammed lake.
Yeah, I mean, this Mill Brook that runs through the gorge, is just, yeah, that's been dammed to create a sort of a boating lake. So yeah, I imagine there would have been some water nearby, especially also to attract the large herbivores as well to drink down there.
If not puffing,
Yes.
that sounds bizarre, but anyway. Okay, so thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating talk, and thank you everyone for coming. Oh, right. Sorry, there is one last thing from Colin, but I think you alluded to this. He said you didn't say what the more re recent researchers looking at the art have found, and I
They've not
think
published it yet, so
I thought that might be the case, which
yes.
suggests we should be keeping our eyes open for some new research results.
Yeah, so they gave a talk about it, but I don't feel comfortable sort of saying it in a talk myself before they've published their results. So
So something interesting
yes, yeah.
to come. Right, well, you heard it here first. Okay, so thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you everyone for coming and good evening.
Thank you.